All right, welcome back to the channel. So, gotta love the gossip, man. Gotta love the gossip. I know I'm being petty these days, but it is what it is. Adrien Broner says that Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Gervonta Davis can't stand each other. Um, and he says a bunch of other stuff in the interview, man, that I thought was very, very enlightening from Adrien the Problem Broner. Let's talk about what Adrien Broner had to say on Fight Hype. Shout out to Fight Hype. Let's talk about what Adrien Broner had to say to Fight Hype in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. So, yes, we're doing it. Yes, we're going to do something that is a little bit gossipy, but it is what it is. I love it. I love it. I love being able to see behind the scenes and get what fighters really think about about each other, especially during this pandemic time where there's not a lot of real boxing matches and stuff to watch. But even then, I gotta admit it, I do kind of like it. So when I watched Fight Hype last night and saw an interview with Adrien Broner. And to me, Adrien Broner is one of the more engaging, interesting, honest guys that there are in boxing. I don't agree with or a big fan of everything Adrien Broner does. But then again, who do you feel like that with in this world where you really support everything they do, right? He's done some kind of nutty stuff outside the ring. Inside the ring, dude, he's an absolute warrior. But he's talking about, in this particular interview, he's talking about the relationship between Floyd Mayweather Jr., himself, and Gervonta Tank Davis. And in talking about it, he says Gervonta Davis can't stand Floyd Mayweather Jr. And Floyd Mayweather Jr. don't like Gervonta Tank Davis either. And when he said that, I was like, oh, okay, now that makes sense. Okay, because Floyd Mayweather Jr. does things related to Gervonta Davis would make you think that he didn't like him, right? He's done several things. But I won't get into the details of it. Gervonta Davis has obviously said things about Floyd Mayweather Jr., like the fact that Floyd Mayweather Jr. was training Devin Haney and working with Devin Haney, and Gervonta Davis said, something about the enemy or whatever. So this real interesting dynamic taking place between Gervonta Davis and Floyd Mayweather Jr. And from the viewpoint of Adrien Broner. Now, what I would hope that means for Gervonta, I hope that doesn't really mean anything for Gervonta Davis and Floyd Mayweather Jr. because I don't know whether or not Gervonta Davis could have been treated any better by Floyd Mayweather Jr. than he's been treated, right? So, for example, Adrien Broner in the interview said, now, if you have not heard the interview, I'm telling you for sure, go to Fight Hype, listen to the interview all the way through because it really is, there's a lot of gems in there. And so, for example, Adrien Broner, the guy that was doing the interview, and hats off to the guy that did the interview. I mean, I don't think that I've seen him before. Maybe I've heard him before, but man, for a site that tends to be very pro Floyd Mayweather Jr., man, this dude was hot on Floyd Mayweather Jr. One of the things that he said, and I don't know if he was trying just to get if he was trying to get headlines out of Adrien Broner or whatever, and Adrien Broner wasn't completely biting, but at the same time, dude did not completely miss the mark because for example, he brought up the fact that he said he was trying to paint this picture that Floyd Mayweather Jr. was a hater as it related to Adrien Broner. He brought up the fact that Floyd Mayweather Jr. had Ashley Theophane fight Adrien Broner, and he felt that there might have been some sore feelings left with Floyd Mayweather Jr. because Adrien Broner beat Ashley Theophane. If you haven't recalled, that was probably the last knockout that Adrien Broner had was with Ashley Theophane, right? So the guy that was doing the interview was saying, nah, those guys thought Ashley Theophane could beat you. And so Floyd was really trying to get you beat. And Adrien Broner was like, nah, man, them dudes knew, those guys knew, right? He didn't try to get me beat. But, Floyd is the type of guy that you can never be better than, right? So you can, and I've heard this about Floyd just out and about, right? That Floyd is the type of guy, and there's a lot of people that are like that, man. Just highly competitive people that really want you to do well, but they don't want you to do better than they're doing, right? They just want you to do well, right? And Floyd Mayweather Jr. could very well be that type of guy that's like, hey, man, I love to make that everybody, that everybody around me is doing well. I've heard this about Floyd as well, that like, if you're kicking it with Floyd, and like back in the day when, I used to roll things and, light them on fire, one of my guys who also used to roll things and light them up on fire used to kick it with Floyd. And he would be like, look, Floyd would be, Floyd doesn't smoke, Floyd doesn't drink. But if you're around Floyd, then Floyd, like during the fight week or the after party after the fight, that Floyd would just, whatever it is that you do, Floyd, to make sure that you have a lot of whatever you need to do what you do. Just that type of guy. And that makes sense. Like somebody that, he's a communal type of guy. He wants people to do well, but at the end of the day, he's hyper competitive and he doesn't want you to do better than he is doing. And I don't, with Floyd, it's like, it's a tough thing, man. Like, shout out to my man, Fahim Satur, who comes by the channel, goes to our, who's always on our live streams, big Floyd Mayweather Jr. fan. And I got another guy, member of the community, actually, dude, legendary, in my opinion, in YouTube, doing the boxing video, Blood Boxing. And Blood Boxing is one of the guys that are like, man, Floyd Mayweather Jr. is a cherry picker of the century. Fahim Satur is the type of guy like loves Floyd Mayweather Jr. And, me, I'm just like stuck in between. When you talk about what he does in the ring, I love the dude, man. You don't get much better than that. That is excellence personified, Floyd Mayweather Jr. in the ring. But outside the ring, man, like I said, I don't agree with everything that he's doing. But, I do think that, Gervonta Davis, though, and Adrien Broner should be thankful to Floyd Mayweather. Now, and this is why I say that. Without Floyd Mayweather Jr., there is no Adrien Broner, okay? Without Floyd Mayweather Jr., there is no Adrien Broner, and therefore there is no Gervonta Tank Davis. Now, the reason that I say that is because, one of the, aside from the fact that, that Adrien Broner, man, I was like, I'm not going to say Andre Berto in this. People were like, Fanon, slow down, man. You're mixing up names too much. So trying to slow down my video a little bit, especially, when I'm sipping on the coffee before the show. Now, Adrien Broner, though, was recruited or brought to HBO. Excellent fighter, but a lot of what he was doing was kind of mimicking Floyd Mayweather Jr. And he mentioned this in that article that, outside the ring, he was really trying to be Floyd Mayweather Jr. Well, that's what HBO saw, and HBO started giving Adrien Broner a lot of attention because Floyd Mayweather Jr. was shining in his career at the time. So that allowed Adrien Broner to come up, and Adrien Broner climbed very high, very quickly in the sport of boxing. I think under the moniker of the next Floyd Mayweather, and that trickled down to trickled over to Gervonta Davis, who was discovered by Adrien Broner, but then brought to Floyd Mayweather, and Floyd Mayweather promoted the guy. And now with Floyd Mayweather promoting him, he's the number one guy, as far as like, cash cow type of conversations below 140 pounds. So, as you live and you learn, you have beef with the people that you work with. I have it at my job. I've had it at several jobs. But, at the end of the day, man, it's about getting the job done. And Floyd Mayweather Jr. has gotten the job done for Gervonta Davis. No, I wouldn't say he got the job done for Adrien Broner, but, it is what it is, man. But so the fact that Gervonta Davis doesn't like or can't stand Floyd Mayweather Jr., I don't think that that's going to make, too much of a difference, other than, hopefully that dislike will keep Gervonta Davis sharp and thinking about a way about how he can, move on with his career if he doesn't want to continue to deal with Floyd Mayweather. But, as much, like I said, going back to the me being caught, but somewhere between what a guy like Fahim Satur, shout out to Fahim Satur, or blood boxing, they're very differing opinions about Floyd Mayweather. I'm kind of in the middle, right? So yeah, you guys might not like him, but dude, you guys have benefited greatly from being around him. And I think that, by and large, just similar to what I would like to see from Floyd Mayweather Jr. when he refers to Muhammad Ali, that, to give the man the respect. And that's something that, Floyd Mayweather Jr. refuses to do with Muhammad Ali. Never gives that dude his just due, man. But I would hope that Adrien Broner and Gervonta Davis can take the good that they got from Floyd Mayweather Jr., weigh that against the bad, man. Don't let the competitiveness get out of hand, and understand that you guys are all in the same boat together. And Floyd Mayweather Jr. really has been a blessing to both of those guys. So, it is what it is. Adrien Broner can feel some sort of way about Floyd Mayweather Jr., but I think he's appreciative. Gervonta Davis can feel some way about Floyd Mayweather Jr. I hope that he would be appreciative. And if he's not, hopefully he's smart enough to find a business arrangement that'll eventually make him happy. But that's my take on the matter. You let me know what you think. And with that, I'm out. Peace.